Well, hello and welcome along to another We Happy Few 506 podcast. I'm here with some wicked guests and my partner in crime, Doug Allen. How are you, Dougie?
Very well, thank you. I'm doing good. I'm better than last week with my tooth troubles, but I've
Oh,
managed to sort those out. Yeah.
I, I think that's an end of podcast chat. We're going to go because I'm interested in your dental torture. I'm joined with series regular and favorite Maddie Mabe from the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. How you doing, Maddie?
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, good to see
Great. And can I thank you, preface this by thank you for bringing our guest in. I believe it was your contact that got our guest here today. We're joined by Rebecca Hutchinson. How are you, Rebecca?
Very good. Honored to be here.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
you. The honour's
The
ours.
honor might be ours when we explain how you came to be here. Rebecca Hutchinson, could you please, if you don't mind, tell us about tell us about your father, please.
Sure. I am Rebecca Hutchinson. I am the fourth and youngest child of Harry Crosby, the navigator in the 100th Bomb Group. And I was born in Iowa while my father was teaching at the University of Iowa. And then we all moved east. And I've been honored to be very involved in helping the production people with information about Dad. I'm kind of the family archivist. I have the biggest house, and my father was a writer, as probably you know, and he saved every single. I'm probably not exaggerating that he saved every letter he ever wrote and made copies of every letter he ever received. And so we've had sort of what I have come to call an ocean of memorabilia that he left behind. And I've sort of been the keeper of the stuff. So I got quite involved in the production support for the Masters of the Air program.
Fantastic. And we'll come on to all the master stuff, but I actually want to talk about your father
Mhm.
as was, rather than through the eyes of Masters of the Air just yet.
Sure.
But can I point out, so you're the fourth child?
I'm the fourth child. There were four of us. It goes boy, girl,
Exactly
and
the same as me. Yeah.
and I'm the youngest.
He is exactly the same spread as me. And it's funny because I'm the third and I have a younger sister who's the fourth, who also has the biggest house and likes to flex about having the biggest house as well.
There's something there. There's probably something there.
She's high functioning as well. Yeah. So can I ask, and Maddie, you can join in here as well, because obviously you know about this as well. So it'd be nice if you dovetail. Can we go right back to your father's upbringing, where he was born and the America that he grew up in? Because am I right in thinking it was North Dakota, or have I got that wrong?
Yes, he was born in a small town called New England, North Dakota, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of funny since he ended up in New England. His father at that time was trying to farm and he was unsuccessful. My dad had an older sister. I think she was 2 or 3 years older than he. His mother was a very strict he describes her as a Calvinist, very particular and strict. And his father, on the other hand, was a womanizer, gambler, kind of carouser. My father always said that he was the best father he ever could have had, but the worst husband that anyone could imagine having.
You're not related, are we? Because that sounds a lot like my father. We've got a really similar family.
Well, I'll just keep going and we'll see.
You will see. I think we have the same DNA.
So they moved from North Dakota. He gave up on farming. He was born in 1919. They gave up on farming and moved to Iowa, and they moved to lots of different towns. I guess my older brother and I went with my father probably when he was in his 70s or 80s back to Iowa, and he showed us all the different houses he lived in. They would live someplace and then they'd move like 2 blocks away because his dad thought that house was better or something. It was quite alarming to see. His older sister died when he was about 4. I can't quite remember the disease that she had. But so really, for the most part, he was an only child for most of his upbringing. He was, by his description, he was kind of goody in school. And he said I was the kind of guy that parents wanted their daughter to date, but he was not always real at ease and comfortable in that world. But anyway, so he small town Iowa, then went to the University of Iowa. Just an example, he worked at Sears and Roebuck to earn money to go to college. And I think he had saved $72 to take to college. And his father borrowed the money to gamble and said, this is a great idea. I'm going to make you a bunch of money, and lost it all. So when he went to the University of Iowa, he had like no savings. Anyway, so he had finished his undergraduate degree and then had started his master's program when Pearl Harbor happened. And he, like many others, joined our service something like 6 days later.
Right.
What made him join the Air Force? Because obviously he was a highly educated guy having a master's. Was that education the real reason why he wanted to become?
Well, he, like a lot of guys, thought he was going to be a pilot. So I suspect there was appeal. He washed out in pilot training after not very much time. And in fact, he later said he didn't have, but he said, I didn't have the ability as a pilot, and it's probably a good thing that I washed out because I wouldn't have made it through. So that's how he got into navigation. I think I don't know exactly if he chose navigation, but I know it started with washing out as a pilot.
But one of my dad's friends was a navigator on a Lancaster bomber, and similarly, he was a very well-educated and highly educated and very well-read man as well. So I think there's something there, isn't there, for people that are very studious, that the navigator is actually the role you want.
Yeah, I think we'll probably get into this about when we talk about his training, but he was he was a serious guy, and he took the training very seriously. So I think it probably was a good fit,
Yeah.
And you might find this interesting, Rebecca, just from the point of view of the casting of Masters of the Air. So we were both in a show. We were both in Band of Brothers, and the cast of Band of Brothers are very, very different people to the cast of Masters of the Air. That we had them on. We've had all the band guys on, and I don't know, we're all kind of on the front foot, and I sort of, macho type of guys, and the Masters guys are much more cerebral and erudite type of guys, and it's sort of that was the sort of the influx of the guys that they had that were on these B-17s as well. That people don't really realize. It's been an epiphany to me to realize that these were really, really smart dudes, like mathematicians, scientists, guys in the air, just trying to figure out the feathering. I've only just learned about that as well, of the propellers and all this kind of stuff. And I'm probably going back over Doug's question, and I apologize if I am, but
right.
What in your mind was the particular skill set that your father had that led him into being a navigator, such a successful navigator? I know he wanted to be a pilot, but what was it about him that sort of, when you meet him, you think, oh yeah, I get it? Was he particularly cerebral? Was he particularly smart? Was he like brilliant mathematician?
I think he was particularly a hard worker. One of the things that I think he really emphasizes in his book, I believe, and certainly to us, he believes that he survived because he always gives credit to the pilots with whom he flew, John Brady and Ev Blakely. I've heard him many times say, I'm alive because of these two guys. But what he also does is give a tremendous amount of credit to the upper echelon people who made them train and train and train. I was just looking in preparation for today. I was looking at some letters, and the letters back to my mother, and he talks about in the last 3 days we've been up in the air training. He would say if we were not on a mission, we were up in the sky training, and he is eternally grateful for that. He was very meticulous in understanding the seriousness of his job. He always said, I don't know if you read this, but I think it's in the book. But he, at some point or other, he had the gun that's normally there by the navigator. He had it taken out because his job was to get the plane where it needed to go and get it home as fast as he could. And he didn't want to be thinking about anything else. So I don't know exactly what time frame he did that, but he talked about, I didn't even want to think about the gun because my job was to get us to the target and back. So I think that's it. He was very serious about the undertaking. I don't think he had a particular, in fact, when my husband came into our family, he used to kind of laugh because he said, he's not really that great a navigator. I mean, he does get lost, So
such a man thing to say.
Yeah, it was funny, but what he came to see is how serious, he was a student. He was a student.
Can I bring Matt Mabe in here and just kind of go back up something? So Rebecca mentioned that Harry washed out. Can you talk us through why that would happen? Why someone with a pilot would wash out? And then can maybe you shine a light on some of the training that Harry went through? And Rebecca can join in here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it's funny if you talk to a lot of officers, especially bombardiers and navigators. A lot of these guys have a familiar story. I joined because I wanted to be a pilot and I washed out. And a lot of people think that's like a derogatory term or like offensive. Like, how could you say someone washed out? But that's what the guys called it themselves. But and they didn't have hurt feelings about it. A lot of these guys, they went through some of the initial training, whether they got up and were able to solo or however far they got through the training. And for one reason or another, it just didn't work out. And some of these guys will tell you, hey, that probably saved my life because I wanted to be a pilot, but I wasn't a great pilot. And I found my niche elsewhere. So it's a fairly common thing at that time that, that guys started as a pilot and then moved on to some other position.
Because I think a lot of them wanted to be like fighter pilots, didn't they? That's some of the guys we've interviewed that you've had on for us. Thank you again for that. They did start with that story. Well, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and then it's a pilot, and then okay, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm going to be a navigator.
Yeah, and even when Rebecca mentioned John Brady, even when in an interview we have of John Brady, he's like, "Hey, I want to be a hotshot pilot," and then they're like, "Hey, you're gonna fly this," and he's like, "All right, well." So I think that's the case for a lot of guys. Few knew of the bombers, existence and utility back then, but that's where they found themselves.
But we've spoken about this before, that we think it still happens in the modern Air Force where, you will apply to be a fighter pilot, but then when they assess your skill level and what you're very good at, then they will direct you to where your best capabilities are. And, because he sounds very similar to my dad's friend, Ron, he's passed away now, but he was incredibly, like, say, studious. I mean, saying that your father, obviously after the war, he went and got a PhD. I mean, they don't just hand those things out. It's an incredible amount of work. You need a great deal of focus and be able to deal with lots of information and put it in some kind of semblance of order. I always thought of pilots have been a little bit more swashbuckling. You're in control of something. It's you have to really be clever as well, but there's a slightly different element to it, where a navigator has to be absolutely exact with what they're working out, especially with what he ended up doing is being the navigator for the whole squadron. Am I right?
For the group, yeah.
And
Rebecca had mentioned him being a serious guy, and I think that's true. In his book, when he's talking about the Trondheim mission, he says in there, winners never quit and quitters never win. And it's, I think that symbolizes a lot for him of like, I'm gonna figure this out. Like he took that job very seriously.
That saying came from his father. That's an example of his dad. And we were taught to always look at the donut, not the hole. And I mean, we had all these sayings that most of whom came from my father's father, but including that one that Matt just was referring.
And so shall we talk about the training, Rebecca? How much do you know about the training that he went through?
I am not an expert on that. I will tell you, Matt probably knows more than I do. I'm not a good expert on exactly what they went through.
Well, Maddie, maybe give us a timeline from the time he becomes a navigator to the time he sees combat? I know Rebecca said that he trained all the time when they weren't on missions, but I wonder if you can give us a sort of timeline from the time that he joined the squadron to the time he goes into combat. Oh, I think there's a little daughter's just gone by. This is fantastic.
Because I'm trying to think, he was on the original cruise that went over. I know that he worked he was trained in Boise, Idaho, and they left from Nebraska, but maybe Matt I don't know when he officially started navigator training, for example.
Yeah, sorry, that other segment out a second. It's interesting. So navigators really went through the works of not only practice flying, but everything from like celestial navigation to plotting a basic course. I don't know all of what's entailed in navigation school, but it's a big deal. A lot of it's math. The guys come out with what at that time they called the computer, which looked like a protractor and other devices that you'd have in like geometry class, but like that's what those guys had to go off of. So there was a big emphasis on the math part, on flying at night, flying during the day, flying in cloud cover, figuring all that stuff out. So I realized as in the series early on, and in real life, Harry had concerns about his own level of comfort with that, but he went through a lot of training, and though he may have lacked some of that confidence early on, he had a lot of that under his belt, and he had a lot of knowledge in terms of how to be an effective navigator.
And what is the most important part of navigating flying at night? Because this is totally undersold in the telling of the history. These guys are flying missions at night.
So in the case of the 100, they didn't fly at night, but the guys would have received celestial navigation training.
Right.
And I remember talking to one of the other navigators from the group that said he spent so much time learning celestial navigation and he used it like once ever when they weren't coming back and it was late. So that wasn't that much of a priority for those guys. But I think in terms of like what's the most important element, if you think about later in the war when there's so many planes flying, you may be a navigator on another plane and you can rely on the group navigator to get you home. It's probably not coming down to you. But in the case of Harry on some of those early missions, not only is he flying as, the lead navigator, you may find yourself in his position, like take the Rosie on the Munster mission, for example, where everybody else is shot down. So it is on you to be a solid navigator and to think on your feet because you're running out of fuel, you might have damage, you might have seconds or minutes to plot a course. So it is up to you at times in terms of like whether you guys are getting back. So as much as Harry credits Brady and Blakely, they in turn credit him as well for, hey, I flew the plane, but this guy told me where to go. So
yes, I apologize for saying about flying at night. I did watch a YouTube documentary on mosquito pilots last night and I got completely confused there. Flying at 60 feet in the dark. So, yes, I realized that the 100 bomber flew daylight raids. That was a bit of a brain freeze on my part. Rebecca, I guess being the curator of your father's history, at what point did he begin talking about his experiences, and what were the experiences that were most vivid to you that he spoke about?
I don't have memories when I was a young child, except he would talk very explicitly about counting the planes coming home, coming back, about going up to the control tower and counting the planes. I think that's the most vivid story that I remember. And in fact, the four of us, the four kids, went back to Thorpe Abbotts with him in, I think it was 1997. And I got to tell you, walking up the stairs of that control tower with my dad was, and it kind of gives me chills now to think about it. And we got up into that room and he just got quiet and he kind of looked off into the horizon and you could see he was like counting planes. And we asked him where his barracks were and he pointed over to where his barracks had been. So that's that thing of counting and hoping that the planes would be coming home was the thing I most remember. He did also talk about the friends that he made. He and Rosie were very good friends after the war. We all of the kids knew Rosie quite well. The Rosenthals were in New York and we were in Boston, so they could get together. So we knew Rosie and his wife Phyllis well. I will tell you that my older brother has very distinct memories of my dad giving him haircuts. They cut the kids' hair. And as he was sitting there in the kitchen with the thing around his neck getting his hair cut, Dad would tell him stories about the missions. So he remembers hearing about Regensburg and Bremen. Those were the biggest ones for Dad. But he does remember, have that distinct memory of it. But I think for us, that thing about watching the planes come back. I also remember him talking about learning how to ride an English bicycle, and he talks about that in the book. He rode a bike as a kid, but American bikes in those days, had no gears, no foot brakes, and he would talk about I still to this day I think he thinks English bikes are kind of crazy. He would talk about that, about all the crashes that they had in the beginning because the guys didn't know how to use handbrakes. But the other thing I would say is talking about his friends, Ed Blakely, and Howard Hamilton was a very good friend of his also. And he was a bombardier, right, Matt? Is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So, we have pictures of our families together with his and stuff. But I think he focused, he didn't talk about the horror. He didn't talk, he was an optimist. Once things were done, he didn't dwell on bad. He kept moving forward.
Yeah, sorry. I like the story you just told about going to the control tower in Thorpe's Arbor. That's kind of whacked me on the back of the head a little bit there.
Yeah, it was something.
Experience.
It was my older brother's idea that we should take Dad back. My mother died young, and so she was gone. And it was my brother's idea that for his birthday, we should all go back to Thorpe Abbotts. And I am so grateful.
Yeah.
That was the first time. I've been there a few times now since, but
yeah, we did a tour there with some of the guys a couple of weeks ago, probably about a month ago now. Some of the Masters guys, and we watched episode 5 in the hangar there, and they got to kind of go up the control tower, and somebody turned up with a Jeep and had them zoom in. They got stolen from us anyway, which disrupted our timeline completely, zooming off the Jeep down the runway and everything. But yeah, I think the real experience would perhaps be to get yourself up there one time. We'd love to have you.
I'm game.
Yeah, that'd be truly awesome. There is one experience. I will come on to the show. I'm not deliberately ducking the show, but I think we should talk about the man rather than the show as much as we can. There's one experience in the show that stuck with me very vividly, and it's after your father has been sort of given the desk job because he's completed all the missions, and obviously he's such a smart fella, they give him the job planning the D-Day raids. And he, like you say, he was an obsessive, hard-working guy that comes across. I'll come on to Anthony Boyle. I think he's a fabulous, fabulous actor. But you see him work so hard and worry so much that he stays awake for 72 hours and then sleeps through D-Day. Was this information gleaned from the book or from you? And how much of it is true? How much of it is dramatization?
No, it's absolutely true. It's in the book, and it's absolutely true. The one thing that's a little different in the series they have him kind of collapse on the floor. I think in the office, what he says is that he went off the road. He never barely even made it back to his barracks some of the time. But when they finally said, "Okay, go to sleep," go to bed, go to sleep, he said he almost drove off the road, or did drive off the road. So no, that's absolutely true. And he would laugh, he would chuckle about the fact that he missed D-Day. I mean, he had this great chuckle anyway, and he would just he just kind of shrugs his shoulders and said, but no, that's absolutely true.
Wow. And Matt, so what was Harry Crosby doing for those 72 hours? Can you sort of fill us in? Because obviously they have to time crunchy to get it into the show and everything. And you sort of kind of glean he's got this incredible responsibility. But what exactly is he doing?
Yeah, I think they did a decent job of fitting it in that time. He was actually making the maps and the routes for the what the hundred would fly on the D-Day mission. So just um, a critical function, and he did it very well for sure.
And was he that obsessive? How much was he just going over and over and over and over it again to make sure it was perfect, or was there literally 72 hours of work to be done?
Well, I think part of it was the volume of missions was part of why it was, so crazy what he was doing, because they were doing, they were flying many more than they normally did, and he was it sounds like he was at least overseeing the preparation for all of them. So it wasn't like before in terms of the number of missions that they were doing. They were doing, planes would come down and the next ones were going up. I mean, he talks about that in letters that we have. So I think it was the sheer volume of what he had to prepare was what was keeping him up and nonstop.
And I imagine there were probably updates coming in throughout that of like, from the eighth commander from the division that would probably alter his planning. So you probably have to think about he had probably worked a lot of stuff out. Changes are coming. You make edits to that. It was probably a very difficult process.
Right. And where were I mean, I'm sorry, I sound ignorant here, but you think about all the 100th Bomb Group missions prior to D-Day, they were pushing further and further into sort of German occupied territory and trying to get towards Germany and all the rest of it, and Munster. But were the D-Day missions more around the Cotentin Peninsula and the Pas-de-Calais?
That's right. Those were all coastal missions. So they weren't flying and bombing as the guys were landing on the beach. At that point, when the guys are landing, they're flying further in and hitting coastal targets. But in the days before that, on the 5th, for example, they did try to strike some of those targets that are right on the coast, like batteries like that. But otherwise, they and other groups were hitting targets further inland to try to soften things up
And
for the
and
landing.
and wouldn't they also, Matt, have been going to other places because they were trying to keep up the deception about where they were gonna land. So I suspect they were doing some
Yeah,
other
that's what I
places as
mentioned.
well.
That's why I mentioned the Pas-de-Calais, because that was the big deception, is that's where the Allies were coming over to.
Mm.
Was that what happening as well, Matt?
That's right. There was a lot of that as well. And again, I can't say enough for how complex these were and how difficult they were in terms of what the guys were facing. And just the timing of it was of critical importance as well, because the last thing you do is hit guys that are landing on the beach or run into airspace for another group. So there was so much calculation involved in that to be able to pull it off.
Right. So I kind of want to sort of move on a little bit and then kind of talk about Masters of the Air, the show, and Rebecca's involvement and all that stuff. But is there anything else from the? Because we sort of jumped ahead to where Harry's working behind the desk and doing all this incredible stuff. Is there anything else from the missions that we should talk about? I mean, for example, for those of you who don't know, how many missions did he fly? And statistically, how was incredible that he complete those missions?
I think the one thing that's really worth mentioning is the Bremen raid,
Right.
which was October 8th, 1943. It was I guess the second raid of Black Week, where the 100th just got practically wiped out. But I mean, Dad, I think to this day he couldn't tell you how he survived that, other than, I mean, that's not true. He credits the pilots and the people in his plane. But let me just read you. Um, this is a letter that he wrote to my mom, and he said, this is on October 9th. So it's one day. He gets back from Bremen. They barely made it back. They landed on a dummy airfield. They didn't know it was a dummy airfield when they landed in England. And, they had to throw all their stuff out of the plane to try to make it lighter, to, gain more height. And I mean, and they had wounded people on board. I mean, it was awful. When they landed, they ran into the only tree that was on this dummy airbase, and they were all smashed up. So he writes, this is one day later. He says, "Dearest Jean, I have just returned from the scene of a very bad airplane accident, and that accident was us. I had hoped that the Regensburg raid would be our worst, but it didn't turn out to be so." And then he says, "Dearest Jean, dearest wife, my dearest wife, I just can't go on. all I can say is that we have gone through all the fury that war can bring. We were hit bad. 4 of our crew were seriously wounded. Charlie Vaya is not expected to walk again. Saunders has only a slight chance to live, and we lost 7 more crews. But we all got back. I love you very much, and I need you so badly. And he wrote my mother 3 letters on this one mission, trying to explain it to her, and he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. And he mentions Charlie Vaya, that he did walk again, but he had serious injuries. Saunders has only a chance to live. He died, I think, within a week of the mission in the hospital. So I guess I think he would want people to understand the horror of war. He doesn't sugarcoat it.
And I was going to say too, the other mission that I think kind of defines Harry that they show in the series is that Trondheim mission, because it's kind of a character arc. Harry had said, he had doubts about his ability as a navigator. And it's funny in the book, he elaborates on it more. He actually thinks like, I'm going to get court-martialed because I did such a bad job, navigating and bringing the guys back. I took the liberty of going in a different direction, which is what got Biddick over Scotland. And then he's like, oh no, here it comes. I'm gonna get my what handed to me here at the end of this. And in fact, it's the complete opposite. Harding, congratulates Harry. Egan, his CO, congratulates him. And he's like the hero of the day. He got the guys back. And I think that mission really built that confidence in him that like, I know how to do this and I'm pretty good at it. And everyone else had that confidence in him as well.
Yeah, I think that the showing it's absolutely accurate to say, he started off thinking, I am not good at this. I don't know what I'm doing. I am way in over my head. And he put his head down. He worked. He studied. He trained. And he got better. And I think that's accurately portrayed actually in this film. And he certainly shows it and it describes it in his book.
And there's one really pertinent part of the letter that you so kindly read out. Thank you so much for being so prepared. It's brilliant. Where he says, "I can't go on." How did he go on? I don't know what I'm trying to say here, Rebecca. But was there times when he just thought, "I can't go on. I cannot go up again"? You see guys in the show saying, "I'm not going up again. I'm not going up. They're just trying to kill all of us. They can't make me do it." Was he ever in that headspace?
I don't think so. He never went to one of the flak houses. He never went on those. When he wanted to get away from the war, he would go to London and he would go to plays and museums, and he was a learner, and he loved being in England and London, but that was his way of getting a break. And he talks about that a lot. He went to London whenever he could. I don't know. I mean, that's the question we ask about all these guys. How did they get back in the plane? They had no choice. I mean, we all do what we got to do because that's what we got. That's what life presents to us. But he did. I mean, he also for his friends. He cared about his friends and he wanted to bring them home.
I think that's what a lot of them is, just because everyone's in the same boat, aren't they? And when you spend your whole work life, you're part of a crew. And one of the things my dad's friend Ron said is that he loved being a navigator because, unlike every other job on the plane, the navigator was always calculating. He said he never really had the time to like, obviously he was scared, but he never had the time to sit and contemplate that when he was actually up in the air, because he says you're constantly evaluating and things to make sure you're checking, triple checking, the speed they're going, the altitude, the wind, everything. You're constantly doing something. And he said he loved it because it meant that he kept him occupied for the entire length of the mission. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then the fear, he then said to us, the fear would happen afterwards, which sounds like that letter. It happens when you're on the ground. You know what I mean? You start to get a little bit reflective. So
let me just read you another paragraph. This one was written October 11th, so it's now 3 days after Bremen. And this one actually was to his mother. But he says about the only consolation is that my combat days are over. The medical officers have said I have given all that man can give. I don't know what will happen to us, probably staff jobs somewhere, but we are so shaken. We sleep under the influence of drugs and go around like ghosts. The formerly packed mess halls are now like tombs. Soon we will be shipped away to rest homes. Now, he never did go to a mess home, but this was written after the Munster raid. 2 days, first Bremen, they lose 7, and then 2 days later, in Munster, they lose, 12, right?
Wow.
Everybody except Rosie.
Yeah.
Now, and I will tell you, when I read this thing about sleeping under the influence of drugs, that jumped out at me because I got to tell you, I grew up in the 60s, and our father had no use for smoking dope when we were teenagers. He didn't smoke cigarettes. They didn't drink a lot. I mean, the idea that he was using drugs. In fact, when I saw that in Masters, they show him taking pills or something, right? As I recall. And I thought, I don't know, my father never would have done that. And then I came across this. And I thought, oh yeah, he did. If they gave it to him, he did. And it really jumped out at me because we would have gotten we did get in serious trouble when he knew what we were doing as teenagers. He did not use drugs.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant point that Doug raises there, the sort of the delayed effect that someone like Harry must have felt, because he was completely immersed in what he was doing. And then you get out of the plane and your entire world falls apart and your nervous system just explodes. So, of course, for these guys to then be able to get up and sometimes go again the next day, they're going to have to medicate themselves.
Yeah.
It or not, And I think that's a nice segue. I kind of want to get on a little bit onto Masters, really. So I think it's a nice segue to talk about your father after the war, and his assimilation back into society, and then the point at which he takes the decision, this sort of cathartic decision to write the book, and sort of how that came about. If you could enlighten us on that, please.
Or so he was an English professor. He was a writer, and we always knew he was going to write, a great American novel. We lived overseas as he was we lived in West Pakistan in the 60s. He was in the Air Force Reserves, and I won't go into that except to say that when he came back, he always told us his novel was going to be about Pakistan, about life in Pakistan. But that one didn't come out. What came out was A Wing and a Prayer. And I think there's an interview that he did with somebody at some group in Minnesota after, when he was on his book tours. And, he says that he was amazed at how quickly his memory came back in terms of the amount of detail that he had. Because the question was, how did you research A Wing and a Prayer? And he said, I didn't really do a lot of research. I just, I started writing and it came out. And I think actually it was partly the reunions, because they started having the more active, it was then the association, the 100th Bomb Group Association. Matt, I'm right that they started in earnest in the late 60s and 70s, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And I think 69 was when they had a pretty big one early on.
Yeah. In fact, the 69, that was in DC, right?
That's right.
I was there. I was in high school. And he was one of the active guys. I mean, he was always into reunions, and, he was the one in his high school reunion and his college reunions and yada, yada. So he was very involved in that. And I think, they started telling stories and they started sharing their experiences with each other. I'm quite sure that that's part of, and he was a writer, he liked the challenge. So I think it was a combination of that. And he always had sort of thought about the ambiguity of war, which is really a major, storyline in his book. He thinks they did the right thing, but he thought war was awful, and he didn't feel good about demolishing cities. So I think he saw the story, but I'm quite certain it was partly the reunions and talking to his friends again.
And I'll just say, from my, I'm biased in saying this, but what Eugene Sledge did for the Marines in the Pacific, Harry Crosby did for the U.S. Army Air Forces. I mean, it is, in my view, the definitive memoir written by a member of the Air Force. Is just a phenomenal read. But to add on to what Rebecca said too, not only did Harry go to the reunions, he was the editor of the newsletter. And while that may seem like a minor thing, he felt a solemn duty to keep the men together. You track down the guys, hey, come and bring your friend to the reunion. He made sure to write about what people were up to in the newsletter. He felt a solemn duty to keep the guys connected after the war. And I actually think that meant a great deal to him because so many guys were able to heal themselves by coming to those reunions at the invitation of Harry. So, just a guy who had such an amazing impact on the group.
Yeah, that's amazing because actually I was going to ask a question I think you just made obsolete, which was there a sort of group feeling once the story started to come out of the reunions of like someone's got to put this down on paper. Harry, it's got to be you.
I don't know if other people said it to him, but he jumped at the chance,
Yeah.
and we're so grateful that we did. When it came out, he would have families coming to him, thanking him because their fathers and grandfathers never talked about it, and that happens to us now. People who didn't know anything about what their fathers did, and he loved that. I'm sitting at my desk and I have a letter here. This is an example. So everybody who wrote him, when he wrote his book, he kept track and made copies. Remember I told you he made copies of everything. He kept track of how many letters he received, and he kept track of how many letters he wrote back. So I have a framed copy here. This was a colleague of mine. I was in the state legislature in New Hampshire, and this was a legislative colleague of mine who wrote my dad in July of 1999. And in the upper right corner, in my dad's writing, it says 1021. So that means this was the 1021 first letter that he received after the printing of Ringing a Prayer. And then it has slash, and it says 796. And what that tells you is he has responded to 796 of those 1021 letters that he has received. And like I told you, he made copies of everything. So he made a copy of this and sent it to me and said, Becky, FYI, the numbers show this is letter number 1021 received. And it's the 796th one I've answered. This one makes me very proud because it was a guy, it was a colleague of mine. But that's who he was. He wrote everybody and he was very appreciative.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So when did the book come out? If you don't mind me asking.
1996, right?
Or not, his book was 93.
93, sorry. Yeah, 93.
Okay. And then I mean it's brilliantly well received amongst his peers and colleagues and everyone's very thankful. And then there's this huge period of time and then John Orloff comes knocking on your door. How was that?
Really fun.
He's a character, John Orloff, isn't he?
Well, and actually I might have met Kirk before I met John. We were starting to begin to hear, the Matt and the foundation was sort of ahead of the game. And Dan Rosenthal, I think, is the first one that called me and said, you won't believe this. And of course we didn't for a long time. But I attended the 2017 foundation reunion in Dulles, right? Dulles, yeah. And that's where Kirk Sadowski spoke. And that's when I met him. And his first words to me were, "Oh yeah, your dad will be in it. He'll be in the series." But initially, I believe there were three main characters. The two Buckies and Rosie. And what Kirk originally explained to us was that Dad was kind of a second level. But what happened in the writing was that and Orloff was John was at that reunion too, and I did meet him at the same time. And I gave him a bunch of my dad's letters. And then it kind of went from there. But I think Dad's position kind of grew as the story was created. But that wasn't the original plan. But the explanation that they give is that my father was one of the few people that was there from the very beginning and was still there at the end. People got shot down, they did their missions, or they were killed. And so he was one of the few guys that was there from the beginning to the end. So he knew the Buckies. And, the Buckies and Rosie didn't overlap that long because Rosie came later and the Buckies got shot down in October of 43. But so Dad knew the Buckies, and then after they were gone, he knew Rosie. So he was sort of able to tie those characters together as they told us.
And was there any particular when you were face to face with Orloff and he's asking his questions and he's scribbling down and all the rest of it? Is there any particular thing that you remember talking to him about? And then when the show came up, you're like, I told him that.
What? It's kind of funny because it's more like I saw Matt recently and I said, what I really want to talk about with all of us who are so involved is how much we gave them that they didn't use. That's what's kind of funny. Yeah. But there's in the beginning of the series they have the thing about he was called Bing. I don't know. I think it's like episode 1 or when they're introducing his character. I think isn't that in there about him being called Bing and he can't sing? That bit about he can't sing. That was totally true. He could not sing worth shit. And so that, there's pieces like that that, were absolutely right. And I know we gave them that. In fact, I remember somebody that Kirk was always asking us to talk to the dialect coach and the prop people. And the prop person was thinking, was making letters that my mother sent, this is a prop, at Dad's bedside. And I needed to give him a handwriting sample. And she said, well, what did your mother call your dad? Sweetie or Harry? And I said, I never heard her call him Harry in my whole life. She called him Bing or Binger. And I remember this, she said, Binger? I said, yeah, that, Bing Crosby. But anyway, yeah, he couldn't sing worth anything. So there were lots of little pieces like that. And at the very end, where they're telling what happened to them afterwards. I don't know if probably nobody else notices this but me. But in the very end, where they're showing Dad and that he went on to have 4 children and they went to Massachusetts and it says Harry and Jean were the PTA presidents at every school that their children attended. And I got to tell you, that brought me tears because my dad was so proud of being PTA president. That was his idea of the epitome of respectability. And remember, his father was this gambling, carousing guy, and he was going to do it differently. And so when I saw that line there, I got all goosebumpy because I remember he's probably told me that 20 times. We were presidents of the PTA and I said to Kirk, that's great. Did you get that from the book? And Kirk laughed and said, no, I got it from you. Don't you remember telling me that?
Fantastic. I don't know how many PTA meetings I've dodged in my time. Very many.
So what kind of, can I just ask the question? So what kind of format would these meetings with John Orloff take and how early on in the production? I mean, were you there?
Mostly over the phone. I gave him, we had 7 months worth of about almost daily letters that we had in our possession that were mostly to my mother. Unfortunately, they were only for about a period of 7 months, but I scanned all of those into the thing for John. We more got connections with Kirk. Kirk would call up and say, I mean, literally, the year that they were doing production in England, we were all busy. Matt was busy, Mike was busy. He called up one night and he said, well, tomorrow we're going to be filming his best friend dying. How do you think he would have reacted? And then I didn't see it until it's the Bubbles pain, when Bubbles dies. Yeah. And I didn't know that at the time. All he said to us was, we're going to be filming him dying. And I said, well, he wouldn't have hugged anybody. That's the first thing. And I said, he might have gone, he wrote letters. He wrote letters all, I mean, a lot of them probably did, but every night he'd be writing letters to his wife, to his mother, to his friends. I said he'd probably go some quiet place and he wouldn't express a lot. But if you recall, they do that whole thing where with the letters where Bubbles writes to my mother when they think he's down and he doesn't send it, and then Dad in the series he reads the letter that Bubbles wrote about him after Bubbles dies. So, but it was constant, and then he'd call and he'd say, do you have any tapes of your father? We need it for the dialect coach. And then they asked for pictures, and we had to prove that whoever took the picture would give them the rights to use it. I'd say, well, this was 60 years ago. We did that kind of research. We did research on handwriting. They wanted to know where my mother lived, her address in Chicago in 1943 when she lived with the wives of Ev Blakely, his pilot, and Howard Hamilton. I think that was the one thing I wasn't able to find for them, which I have since found, but I couldn't find it for them. But it was really more Kirk. Initially, John, but John didn't talk to us too much about the writing as it was going along. It was more during the production period, and it was pretty continual at that stage.
Wow.
Did you manage to get to the set? Did they invite you to the set?
Yeah, so all four of us went in the midst of COVID, and we thought we were going to get to meet Anthony. Then we didn't, but Kirk took us around. We saw actually this is true. We went to the set where the beds, where their barracks were, and we walk into the set. And I immediately I point at this one bed and say, that's got to be Dad's. And the reason I knew it was because it had a phonograph beside it. And it wasn't in the series, but there's this whole thing in his book about how he loved music. And he took a phonograph over in his locker. And so I knew immediately that had to be his bed. And I walked up to it, and sure enough, Harry Crosby. And my older brother walks up to the bedside table. Now, this is the set, right? These are all props. He walks up to the bedside table and he's looking at these letters that are there by Dad's bed. And he said, God, these are Mom's letters. And none of us, the rest of us looked at them. But when we got back to the States, I heard this was my brother Steve telling somebody, yeah, they had our actual letters. My sister sent him Mom's letters. Well, they weren't our mother's letters. But the handwriting was so accurate that her son, thought they were his mother's letters.
Wow, they recreated them.
They just do not mess around.
It's amazing, isn't it?
What they do. But I never gave them letters.
That is absolutely incredible. They just don't mess around, these guys. And just
really good.
Just to round things off, two questions actually, I guess, for you, Rebecca. Firstly, did you meet Anthony Boyle?
Yeah. So the four of us, went to the LA premiere, and we got to meet him then, and it was wonderful. And I got to tell you, the first thing he said to us, I think he didn't know that we were all there until shortly before, I guess. And so the very first thing he says, so at the premiere, we only saw episode 1. So, in episode 1, my father's throwing up all the time. So the first thing he says to us when he said it to us was, oh my God, I just want you to know, I don't throw up through the whole series. It gets better. And he was laughing. And we said, no, it's all right. We know the story. It's okay. And then later, he also came to Boston because we had a Boston premiere. And when he found out he was going to be going to Boston, he said, oh my God, they're going to run me out of town because I'm, throwing up all the time. And the theater was full of people that knew my dad.
Wow.
It was wonderful. We had a great conversation. We think he did a great job, and we were delighted.
And so I guess my final question to you, I think it rounds things off kind of nicely, Rebecca, is what was your overall feeling about the show, Masters of the Air?
Oh, I know. We thought it was great. I mean, did they get our dad exactly right? Not maybe not. Although, of course, we didn't know him when he was 23 years old. But in terms of honoring the men of what they did, it's absolutely wonderful. And my father absolutely loved movies. Every year we would get a typewritten review of all of the Academy Award nominated movies every single year. He loved movies. So, he would be absolutely beside himself with excitement. And we think it's very accurate. I mean, the relationship they show with my father and Rosie, we think is spot on. They were really good buddies. The horror of it, as well as the camaraderie, I think that's a lot that my father thought was important to tell. And they did a great job. And the music, I love the music. I listen to it all the time now.
Yeah, we had the composer on actually on the podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I'm trying to reach him. I want to tell him how great I think it is.
Oh, Leighton will give you his details. We had him on the
Seriously,
podcast.
if you have a way to contact him, I would love to tell him.
Leighton's got his details. He's a super cool guy, and in fact, I think he might this weekend be in Malaga, and they're doing some symposium, and I think he's like a guest of honor there. It's a whole thing. We were going to go, but it kind of schedules conflicted and stuff. But yeah, he's a super cool guy. We'll definitely hook you up.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Great. Well, listen, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on. We've had you for about an hour. It's been an absolute joy. Been so prepared and open and excellent. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Matt, for putting us together.
Yeah, Maddie, thank you so much again.
Thanks, Rebecca. Lovely to meet you. Thanks, Matt, again.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time, Maddie.
See you guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye. Wow.
Cool. Yeah, that was a good one. Very
good.
That
was amazing, wasn't it?
That was a really good one. Hey, so listen, I don't mean to make light of anything, and I didn't do the Nearly story with her. I don't know why. I just feel like I didn't want to do the Nearly story with her.
No, I don't think this. No.
I just feel like I was lightening it or something. So
no. You were right to not do the Nearly stuff. This is about her father. It's about her relationship with her father. It's about her experience.
Yeah.
This isn't. She's not a performer. She's not an actor. So
yeah, exactly.
I feel that question is kind of reserved for the actors and stuff. That Yeah. What a wonderful guest, and her father. What an incredible human, eh?
Wow. And that guy Anthony Boyle that plays him is freaking brilliant. I don't want to say it because obviously we have a lot of Masters guys on, but his performance is just exceptional. So before we go, tell us about your teeth.
Oh God, no. So the reason I wasn't on the show last week was because I had toothache for about a week, and it was just getting really, like, for the whole side of the mouth, it's getting more and more sensitive. And I had a dentist appointment booked for Wednesday this week, just gone. But then at about 4:00 on Sunday, the pain ramped up so much I couldn't. The only way to cure it was to have cold water, and I had an exposed nerve.
Oh no!
So I was getting it relieved the pain for about a minute and a half, and it got so bad that the pain would start in the tooth and go to the whole side of the head. It was so extreme; it would take my breath away. And I had to go to the emergency dentist, and I got there about 8:15, and they'd said in this little thing like a pain chart, how bad is it? And I actually added an extra bit and went here, and it did nothing. It didn't. Typical German. We weren't allowed to jump the queue, even though I was obviously the only one in agony.
Right.
I had to keep, like, a couple of times I had to go to the toilet because I thought I was gonna throw up because the pain was so extreme. I got seen at 1:45 in the morning, and they put an emergency filling in or whatever. And then I had to have root canal on Wednesday.
Oh,
that's why I missed it. It was absolute agony. So that was my Sunday. Yeah,
I think you can be forgiven for that, don't you?
Yeah. And there was this woman there, this old woman who was in front of me in the queue. And she was there with I guess it was her daughter's husband. They looked like, I think they might have been Turkish. She must have been 90 if she was a day. She didn't have a tooth in her head. And she was there in the queue, smiling away. Like I don't know. I just almost lost the plot on several occasions that evening when I was just like looking at everyone else going, you don't need to be here, you don't need to be here. I was clearly in agony. But yeah, it just came
Yeah.
out of nowhere, the pain, and it was an exposed nerve. And I'd never had pain like it. So yeah.
The old woman had come for a teeth polishing as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. Was she going to have the gums polished? Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
All right,
what a lovely guest. So
wonderful. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back again next week. Thanks to everybody who supports us. Thanks to our Patreons.
yeah,
Tell your friends and family, and we'll see you next week. Cheers, guys. Thanks very much.
see you.